I recently did a full review of this camera, the original X100, and I noticed in the comments that some of you were interested in purchasing one, and some of you recently did. So if you're wondering what to do after you pick one up, the setup, settings, and how to shoot with it, then this video is for you. Hi, my name is Jorge, welcome. In this channel we merge creativity and productivity to try to live a more fulfilling life. First, I would like to say thank you to everyone that watched the review, all of the comments and all the positive feedback. I really appreciate it. Today we'll talk about what to keep in mind when purchasing one of these. We'll talk about checking your firmware, going through the initial setup, settings for street photography, answering some of the questions left in the review, as well as addressing a minor correction from my review as well. Let's get started. The first couple batches of the original X100 had a manufacturing issue in the lens mechanism, causing the aperture blades to stick. This is commonly known as the SAP issue, or sticky aperture blade issue, and that is something that they eventually corrected and improved upon on the later models. However, since you can only buy this camera used, that is something that you really need to check beforehand. So the most common ways to check are with the serial numbers on the bottom of the camera, or just a physical camera test as well. According to some of the info I found online, forums and whatnot, the X100 cameras that were affected by SAP started with the serial numbers that begin with 12, 13, and 14. Now that is not always accurate. It doesn't mean that every single camera with those serials will have issues. It just means that those are the earlier batches and those are the most probable or the most likely to have issues. Keep that in mind. The serial number of my camera starts with 12. But it does not seem to have that issue, or at the very least is not as noticeable like the other cameras out there. If you're buying the camera locally, then you can perform a quick test yourself to make sure that the blades don't stick. You can take photographs and see if the results match your settings. I'm exposing for a photo right here, and it's not completely blown out. If it were, then it means that the blades are not closing properly or not fast enough, and a lot more light is coming into the sensor than intended. You can also do a visual test to make sure that the blades close and open properly. The easiest way is to do a shutter test in every f-stop available and at high shutter speeds as well. Observe the aperture blades as you take the photo. Do they close all the way? And do they open properly right after taking the photo? Repeat the process until you go through all the aperture stops. Before continuing, please make sure you have the latest firmware installed. To check your current firmware, make sure you press and hold the display/back button while you turn the camera on. You should see this boot menu telling you your current firmware number. If you have the latest firmware installed, that's great. If not, then make sure you go to the official Fujifilm website and follow the easy and clear steps to download the firmware and install it. Link in the description down below. Make sure you have a formatted memory card and a full battery as well. That's very important. I almost broke the camera. I forgot to charge the battery and I was performing the firmware update and the battery was about to die, and I was just counting the seconds before it happened. I almost had a heart attack. I previously made a full comprehensive guide on how to set up the X100 cameras for street photography. That video also applies to this camera right here. Link in the description if you haven't watched it already. However, I want to talk about the steps and the settings that are specific to this camera, the X100. Alright, so we go through the setup. The first thing you want to do is to hit the menu button and go into the bottom section where it says setup. In the setup, you're going to turn your image display off and you're going to turn every single sound that the camera makes. Shutter off, volume off, everything off. We can enable quick start mode. It makes the camera boot a little bit faster, so that's great. Turn off the AF illuminator off, so it doesn't illuminate and tell people when you're trying to take a photo. And in the AF lock button, we're gonna choose AF lock only, which is really important to set up the AFL button as your back button focus. Change your scale units to whatever you want and your framing guidelines to whatever you want. I like grid 9. If you go into display custom settings, you can choose between the optical viewfinder and the electronic viewfinder. And in here, you can change things like your electronic level, your histogram, your framing guidelines, the flash photometry, enable or disable whatever you want, and you should be good to go. Make sure your image quality is set to L or large. And also make sure you're shooting both fine, JPEGs, and RAW. In the film simulation settings, you have a couple settings here. My go-to for street photography is going to be STS soft or monochrome for black and white. For these on-camera settings like sharpness and color, it really depends up to you, but I like to bring the sharpness down, and I also like to bring the noise reduction down and apply that in post. I have mentioned it before in my previous videos, but I put the camera in manual mode and I use the AFL button as my back button focus. So now my shutter button is not linked to focusing and taking the photo at the same time. In the function button, we can customize the functions of the camera. In my X100 review, I mentioned that you can only customize the top function button. The ND filter is very important for street photography and my personal shooting style. And I mentioned that I was really disappointed that the camera only had one custom function button at the top and I already assigned it to the ISO. However, I was wrong. You can set the raw button as a custom function button, in my case, the ND filter, which drastically improves the usability of this camera for street photography. So I would like to take a moment to thank everybody that corrected me and mentioned it in the comments. Everybody was really respectful and polite, and I really appreciate that. And that is precisely the type of community that I want to build here. People helping each other respectfully in a mature way like adults. And because of that, thank you. I really mean it. Okay, so I have a couple comments selected here. Some of these are just comments and suggestions, some are actual questions, so I want to go through some of these. Maybe it will help somebody out there as well. There were a lot of comments about the speed of the camera. And yes, when you do a firmware update, it gets better. However, to me, it feels extremely slow because I'm coming from the X100V and the X-T3 and the X100F. That is the context every time I say the camera feels slow and not responsive. Keep that in mind. The colors and the profiles that the camera have are very good, but when I said that the cameras don't have the ones I use frequently, I referred to Classic Chrome, Classic Negative, and Across. AYFJ says, I have a question regarding the focus setup. You select manual focus then back button focus. Surely manual focus disables all autofocus settings. That is not the case. When you select manual focus on the camera, it disables the hunting by the shutter, but you can still assign it, like I just did, to the AFL button, and by doing that, you control the focus. What this does is it eliminates the camera thinking for you. You have control of the focus. You can focus on a spot and wait for somebody to come in, a bicycle or a car, and you can plan your shots because of that. You're not hoping that whatever happens in the moment, you press the shutter and it gets it in focus. If you do that, you will miss a lot of shots. I did see questions about using the camera itself. So always aperture priority or manual mode. Those are the only two modes that I use. If I don't feel like working too hard, then I'll just use aperture priority. And with the newer cameras, I can do auto ISO. With this one, I like to control my ISO a little bit more. But what I really recommend is manual exposure. Learn the exposure triangle, take control of your settings, and you'll get better results. There's a couple comments talking about the battery life and the OBF, and this is 100% accurate. If you only use the optical viewfinder and you minimize the use of the screen, the battery lasts all day long. Actually tested myself, I can confirm. And I would like to try the X Pro 1 in the future. I think it has specific characteristics that I want to test. Color and feel and the quality of the images. So maybe eventually in the future I'll be switching this camera for an X Pro 1. Let me know what you think down below. Alright, so hopefully this video helps you get started with your new camera. There's a lot more to learn, but these are the first couple steps to get your craft in motion. If you have any more suggestions or tips, please leave a comment down below. My channel is very small, but I've noticed people helping each other and sharing their experiences, and that is exactly what I want to achieve with this channel. Great work, everybody. That is it for today's video. If you found this video helpful or valuable, please like and subscribe and follow me on Instagram. Thank you very much for watching, for giving me your time and your energy, and good luck with your creative process.